This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. We can, part 2 of our review of the Iggeres HaMussar of Rabbi Yisroel Salantar. So, Rabbi Yisroel concluded that both opinions are correct. Namely, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is both the force of passion as well as the Ruach HaTumah. So too, the Yetzer Tov is the Koyach HaSeichel, and it's also a Koyach HaKedusha. Nevertheless, says Rabbi Yisroel Salantar, these two components of the Yetzer Hara correspond to a person's physical and spiritual component. We have a physical aspect to us and a spiritual aspect to us. Now, just like in the physical world, if you want to keep your soul in your body, you can't really treat the soul. There's nothing to do for the soul. You could just keep the body in good shape by feeding it healthy foods, by exercising and preserving the body, and by doing so, the soul will stay in the body. It's, so to speak, the same way from a spiritual standpoint. When trying to be healthy spiritually, you need to focus on the physical component of the neshama. Namely, the best medication for the soul is not the spiritual aspect of the Torah, but the physical aspect. Namely, the punishments that emerge from the Torah. Learning the Torah and the physical repercussions for sin is the most powerful weapon against the Yetzer Hara. In fact, the Rabbi Yisroel quotes a Gemara in Baba Basra on Daf Tezayin. Eov wanted to exempt the whole world from punishment. Eov said, God, you created animals, some have split hooves, some don't, you created Gan Eden, Gehenim, Tzadikim, Risham. Nobody could change, nobody could really do things other than the way you program them. And the Gemara says they told Eov, you have nullified fear and you have diminished conversation before God, because nobody's program. There is a weapon to fight the Yetzer Hara, namely the Torah. Now the language that they told Eov is, you've nullified fear, which indicates the main weapon against the Yetzer Hara is the fear element of the Torah. It's not enough just to learn, but it's the yira that emanates from the Torah which is most effective. Now, there's a general medication from the Torah, and there's a more specific medication. The general medication is that an Avera has punishment, and every mitzvah has reward. That's a general medication against the Yetzer Hara. Schar v'oinesh. However, there is another aspect as well, and this is the main medication and the most powerful and compelling, namely to learn a subject that you're having trouble in depth. By learning it in depth, it makes a deep effect on a person's conscience and has a profound effect on a person's makeup. In fact, Rabbi Yisroel says the most powerful way to change nature is to learn a particular subject be'iyun. And in fact, that is the only way for a person to change their nature, by learning the subject be'iyun. Now, there are various different kinds of averos. And in some communities, some averos are more challenging than in other communities. And by nature, for most people, treifa is eating animals that are not kosher is not much of an isayon. Sometimes, even when nobody knows that the animal became a treifa, usually a person will have the fear of God to go and ask a shaila. And when it comes to monetary matters, people don't have the same kind of carefulness in their observance, where not only will many people not pay until the money is demanded from them, but often, even when the money is demanded from them, they won't pay. So gezela and tarfus are not on equal footing in many people's eyes. And even so, nevertheless, how do we change that phenomenon? Rabbi Yisroel says by learning a subject be'iyun, we can elevate and cause and equate certain areas in people's consciousness where until then it was very weak and very low in a person's eyes, and by learning it be'iyun, one elevates it and puts on an equal playing field. And at the very least, says Rabbi Yisroel, by learning about a particular subject, you won't be considered violating it lahachis. You won't be doing it lahachis. Rabbi Yisroel does say a frightening thing, that the Gemara in Chulin says that by a mumar l'te'avon, by someone who's an apikoires, when he has a desire to be, that the chametz that was in his house on Pesach and he's over on Bal Yirah, he'll switch it after Pesach to lower the Isser. And we could rely that he did this. That was back in the day. Nowadays, the halacha has changed, that someone who eats nevel te'avain, you can't eat anything from him, because we're concerned that he would even do it not l'te'avon. So we see that in our generation, the Yetzer Hara has been so effective that there's no concept, there's no line of demarcation anymore really between mumar l'te'avon and mumar l'hachis. Now, Rabbi Yisroel says, when it comes to the medication against the Yetzer Hara, in general, Torah is a protection. In general, Torah protects a person. It's a general medication. However, that medication is not really so relevant. Because it's true, even if a person learns Shar Shanagach Sapara, it will save a person from Lashon Hara. But the truth is, that kind of medicine, you have to take anyway, because a person's obligated to learn as much as they can in all of their spare time. And whether the Yetzer Hara is strong or weak, would not require you to learn more and would not allow you to learn less. So the general medication of learning in general fights the Yetzer Hara is not really relevant in terms of it being a medication against the Yetzer Hara, because you have to learn anyway. So therefore the spiritual aspect of learning is not so relevant when it comes to fighting the Yetzer Hara, but it's the physical aspect of learning, namely learning about the fear and the punishment of a certain area, or learning a subject be'iyun, that is most relevant, namely because if you find yourself weak or struggling in a certain area, that would call for a greater medication. That would require a person to learn more, to learn that subject more in depth, to learn more of the fear. And Rabbi Yisroel says, because and he says further, the spiritual medication of learning Torah in general will only be effective if you take the physical medication, namely to learn about the fear of a particular area or to learn a subject in depth. However, the Yetzer Hara does not even let us recognize that we are sick in the first place. So Rabbi Yisroel has a great eitzah, and Rabbi Yisroel's amazing eitzah is, even though we don't recognize our own illness and our own sickness, but it is something that we do see in others, because as George Bernard Shaw says, when it comes to self-deception, every man is a genius. Nevertheless, we do see the weaknesses and the strugglings of others. So if we encourage others to learn Mussar, because we see that they need it, and we learn Mussar ourselves to be able to inspire others, slowly, the physical medication of the Torah will allow us to recognize our sin and begin to change. And in the zechus of helping other people do tshuva, not only will one learn Mussar themselves, and that will serve as a physical medication, but you will also get a spiritual medication, because Chazal say that if you're mezakeh the rabbim, then you won't come to sin. And that is really the greatest possible zechus, the greatest merit that one could develop, the greatest zechus that one could have, is to encourage other people to learn Mussar. There's no greater mitzvah that a person could try to achieve than to encourage and inspire and show other people the importance of limud HaMussar, which is the main message of the Iggeres HaMussar. The Iggeres HaMussar is sometimes called the Mussar Treatise, and Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to read through it, and we have a brief review. And Be'ezus Hashem, Chodesh Elul will begin our next sefer. We'll see what that will be. And until then, everyone is invited to tonight's shir on Shabbos Nachamu and Tu B'Av. Wishing everyone bracha v'hatzlacha and a great evening. Kol tov.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.